A biopic about a musician who has been gone for 17 years just crossed $1 billion at the global box office. Let that sit for a second. Not adjusted for inflation. Not a lifetime re-release total. $1 billion in theaters in 3.5 months in the year 2026. I write about box office numbers for fun, which already tells you something concerning about my personality. And even by my standards, this one is strange. Critics were lukewarm. Some reviews were outright rough. And audiences showed up anyway, in numbers that make studio executives forget how to blink. Today we're talking about Michael, the Antoine Fuqua-directed biopic starring Jaafar Jackson as his own uncle, and the news that just dropped. It's finally coming to streaming. But the streaming date is really just the excuse. The real story is what this film's box office run says about how movies get released in 2026, why critics and audiences are having two completely different experiences with the same 2 hours and channel change, and whether a franchise can actually be built out of a man's entire life story. So let's get into it. Here's the headline everyone's reporting today. Starz has confirmed that Michael begins streaming on August 10th. It'll be available across the Starz app, Starz On Demand, and every platform that carries the service. That same night at 7 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, the Starz cable channel airs it as a linear television premiere, which is a phrase I did not expect to type in the year 2026, but here we are. If you're wondering why Starz specifically, here's the quick explanation nobody bothers to give you. Lionsgate bought Starz back in 2016. Since 2021, there's been a standing arrangement where Lionsgate's theatrical releases get their first streaming window exclusively on that platform. This isn't a special deal made for Michael Jackson. It's just the pipe the water already runs through. Sydney Sweeney's The Housemaid went through that same pipe. So did Russell Crowe's mixed martial arts thriller Beast, which is actually landing on Starz just 2 days earlier, on August 8th. What is unusual is the runway it took to get here. April 24th theatrical release. June 9th digital purchase option. July 14th physical media. August 10th streaming. That's 108 days of theatrical exclusivity before anyone could stream it. In an industry where some films land on a streaming service 17 days after opening weekend, 108 days is almost a protest statement. Let's talk numbers, because this is where my inner spreadsheet nerd wakes up. Opening weekend, $97.2 million domestically, $217 million worldwide. That was already the biggest opening weekend a musical biopic had ever posted. For comparison, Bohemian Rhapsody, the Freddie Mercury film that basically invented the modern rock biopic gold rush, never opened anywhere close to that. Then the film just kept climbing instead of the usual second weekend cliff dive most movies take. By mid-June, it had passed Bohemian Rhapsody's total lifetime haul of $911 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing music biopic of all time. On July 14th, it crossed $1 billion globally. As of the numbers being reported this week, domestic totals sit around $372 million, with worldwide north of $1.01 billion. To put that billion-dollar club in context, 2026 has had exactly 3 movies cross that threshold. Pixar's Toy Story 5, Illumination's Super Mario Galaxy movie, and a 2-hour drama about a musician's rise to fame, with no superhero, no dinosaur, and no plumber in sight. It also means Michael has, at time of writing, quietly become Lionsgate's single highest-grossing film in the studio's entire history. Not highest-grossing biopic for Lionsgate. Highest-grossing film, period, beating out every action franchise and every Hunger Games sequel they've ever released. It also beat Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer for the biggest single day opening a biographical film has ever had, and it beat Straight Outta Compton for the biggest musical biopic opening weekend. Then it beat both of them again on cumulative box office. It's rare for one film to dethrone 2 separate box office records held by 2 separate genres in the same calendar year. This one did it before summer even started. Here's where things get genuinely interesting to me, because the story isn't just movie made money. It's that this movie made money in a way that seems to defy the usual formula. Critics were not kind. Review aggregates for Michael sit noticeably lower than you'd expect for a film pulling in these numbers. Several reviewers pointed to pacing issues in the back half, a script that occasionally treats controversy with kid gloves, and a runtime that some felt could have used a trim. But here's the twist. Audiences disagree loudly. The film pulled an A- CinemaScore, which is the grade movie theaters get straight from exiting audiences on opening night, not internet reviewers. And on Rotten Tomatoes audience score, separate from the critic score, it's sitting at 97%. That gap between critic reception and audience reception is one of the widest we've seen for a major awards-adjacent release in years. So, what's actually happening here? A few theories worth chewing on. 1. Nostalgia doesn't grade on a curve. People aren't showing up to critique cinematography. They're showing up to relive the Jackson 5, to hear Billie Jean drop in a theater sound system, to watch a moonwalk land on a 40-foot screen. That's an emotional transaction critics can't fully evaluate through a technical lens. The casting decision did something clever. Putting Jaafar Jackson, Michael's actual nephew, in the lead role wasn't just a stunt. Variety's Owen Gleiberman, one of the more measured critics out there, specifically praised how the performance captured Michael's physical presence, calling out the voice and the movement work as something close to uncanny. When a critic who didn't love the film still stops to single out the lead performance, that tells you the film's biggest asset and its biggest liability might be sitting in the exact same scene. 3. And this is the one studios will study for years. The film covers Michael Jackson's career only from the Jackson 5's formation in the late 1960s through the record-setting Bad World Tour in the late 80s. That's a deliberate cutoff. It stops before the most legally and culturally complicated chapters of his later life. Depending on who you ask, that's either a smart narrative boundary that keeps the film focused on the artistry, or a convenient one that lets it avoid its hardest questions. Both readings are floating around online right now, and honestly, both have a point that let's zoom out for a second, because the release calendar on this movie is a case study on its own. Traditionally, a big theatrical release gets somewhere between 30 and 45 days before it's available to rent or buy digitally, and streaming access follows a few weeks or months after that, depending on the studio's deals. Lionsgate stretched every stage of that timeline for Michael. 108 days in theaters before any streaming option existed at all. A separate digital purchase window in June. A physical disc release in July. And now, finally, subscription streaming and cable in August. Why stretch it out when they could have banked a quicker digital payday? Because every additional week in theaters is a week where the film is still generating box office revenue, still building word of mouth, and still forcing entertainment journalists like whoever wrote the article you might have already read on this to publish another headline about another record broken. Every one of those headlines is free marketing for the eventual streaming release. It's a strategy that only works if the film has genuine staying power, and this one clearly did. Weeks after its digital debut in June, it was still playing in theaters, and it was still closing in on the Super Mario Galaxy movie for the position of second highest grossing film of the year, trailing only Toy Story 5. It's also been parked in the top 10 across multiple digital platforms for weeks, generally trailing that same animated sequel along with horror titles Obsession and Backrooms, but still comfortably ahead of most of the year's other major releases. If you're a studio executive watching this rollout, the lesson is uncomfortable but clear. Patience made more money than urgency would have. That's not a lesson every studio is built to learn, because quarterly earnings calls don't reward patience. But Lionsgate now has a live case study to point to the next time a finance department asks why a movie isn't rushing to a subscription platform. Quick rundown on who's actually in this thing, because the ensemble is doing more heavy lifting than it gets credit for. Colman Domingo plays Joseph Jackson, the family patriarch, opposite Nia Long as matriarch Catherine Jackson. Miles Teller plays entertainment attorney John Branca. Laura Harrier plays music producer Suzanne DePasse. Kat Graham plays Diana Ross, and Lawrence Tate plays Motown founder Berry Gordy. The Jackson siblings are played by a set of largely newer actors, with a young Michael portrayed by Juliano Valdi before Jaafar Jackson takes over the role as an adult. Behind the camera, this is Antoine Fuqua, the director behind Training Day and the Equalizer franchise, working from a script by John Logan. It was produced by Graham King, the same producer behind Bohemian Rhapsody, which explains a lot about the film's structural DNA. Lionsgate first put this project into motion back in February 2022, and Fuqua and Jaafar Jackson both joined in February 2023, meaning this has been in development for roughly 4 years before a single ticket sold. Now, the part everyone's actually asking about. Lionsgate has already confirmed a sequel is in the works. And logically, that makes sense, because this film's chosen ending point, the Bad World Tour in the late 1980s, leaves an enormous amount of story on the table. The 1990s, the dangerous and history eras, the most publicly complicated and scrutinized years of his entire life. Whether the studio actually leans into that material or continues the pattern of choosing the more triumphant chapters remains to be seen. Here's the part that connects directly back to today's news, though. How well Michael performs on Starz, both in subscriber growth and viewership numbers, is going to directly influence how fast that sequel gets greenlit for production. If the streaming premiere brings in a wave of new Starz subscribers the way the box office brought in a wave of new theatergoers, expect Lionsgate to try to get cameras rolling on the follow-up sometime next year. If the streaming numbers are merely fine, don't be surprised if that timeline slips. So here's where I land on all of this. Michael is proof that the traditional biopic formula, warts and all realism plus critical acclaim, isn't actually the formula audiences are asking for anymore. What audiences wanted was spectacle, catharsis, and a note-perfect recreation of a cultural icon at the peak of his powers. Critics wanted a more complicated, more interrogative film. Both of those are legitimate things to want from a movie. They just happen to be different movies, and this one chose its lane deliberately. It's also proof that theatrical patience can still pay off financially, at a moment when most conventional wisdom says audiences won't wait for anything. 108 days between theatrical release and streaming used to be standard practice a decade ago. In 2026, it's now unusual enough to be worth a whole video breaking down why it worked. And it sets up a genuinely interesting test case come August 10th. Does a billion-dollar theatrical run translate into a streaming event? Or does a film like this simply run out of new audience once everyone who wanted to see it already has? We'll have actual viewership data to look at within a few weeks of that premiere, and I'll be back here breaking it down when we do. If you want to actually watch it yourself, Michael hit Starz streaming and on-demand August 10th, with a linear TV premiere the same night at 7 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribe, because we track these box office and streaming stories the moment the numbers actually mean something, not just when a press release drops. Let me know in the comments whether you're team critics or team audience on this one. I have a feeling that comment section is going to be a genuine argument. See you in the next one.